All right, let's go over lost comm procedures. So this is actually one that I failed my check ride on. The only check ride bus that I have out of all 7 of my check rides, and it's because it's a pretty tough situation when the DPE gives you a lost comm scenario. You pretty much have to have the entire regulation 91.185 memorized and in your head so that you can pretty much recite it and then go through whatever scenario he's giving you and apply that regulation to it. I didn't really have it memorized, and that's what led to my downfall. And then I fumbled it once he gave me the scenario. So that's my number one recommendation, is have it memorized going into the check ride. And the regulation itself is a little bit hard to understand in my opinion. So we're gonna break it down in this video and see if we can make it a little bit simpler. So I think it's easiest to break this up into steps. I feel like it's like the easiest way to memorize it. So we're gonna break it into 4 steps using the regulation. Step number 1 is gonna be if you ever break out of IMC, then you just wanna maintain VFR instantly. Do whatever it takes to avoid the clouds and land as soon as practical. Obviously, it's safer to be outside the clouds without a radio so you can actually see planes and whatnot, and then make your way to an airport safely with actual visibility. Step number 2 is we have to figure out what route we're going to be flying if we're still in IMC conditions. The best way to remember this is by memorizing A.V.E.F. It's an acronym that goes over which route you should fly in order of what you received last. So let's say you received your assigned routing last from ATC. Maybe they just told you direct to Seal Beach VOR. Then you'll just continue direct to Seal Beach VOR, and then whatever routing is after that on your filed approach or your filed route. So after that, then you would move to vectored. If they just told you radar vectors towards Seal Beach VOR, then instead of just continuing on whatever heading they gave you, the second that you lose your comms, you would continue direct to Seal Beach VOR after comms are lost. Then expected, that's going to be if they ever tell you, expect direct to Wells, like a random fix in 10 minutes. Sometimes they say things like that when they're trying to set you up for the approach. And obviously you would then just start to head direct to Wells if you hadn't heard an assigned or a vector. And then finally, F stands for filed. So if you hadn't heard any of the first 3 things, then you'll stick with your first original assigned route, which you'll have pulled up on your GPS or 4Flight or whatever. So continue with whatever routing you're currently on. After we figured out what routing we're on, then step number 3, we have to figure out what altitude we should be at to remain clear of all obstacles. The acronym for this one is M.E.A. You want to remain at the highest of whichever is the highest of these 3. Minimum en route altitude, expected altitude, or assigned altitude. So minimum en route altitude, that's just going to be depicted on the Victor Airways on your chart. So if you're on a Victor Airway, check that. Maybe that's the highest. Maybe you have to climb a little bit and get up to that. Expected is obviously going to be when you get your craft clearance at the very beginning of your IFR flight. They'll tell you fly 3,000, expect 5,000, 10 minutes after departure. So 5,000 is going to be our expected altitude. If that's your highest, go up to that. And then finally, the A is your assigned altitude, which is the most recent thing that you received from ATC. So they might assign you something different than your original clearance. They might just assign you 8,000. Then boom, that's your highest altitude. You should be at that for the remainder of the routing until you hit your clearance limit, which is going to be step number 4. So your clearance limit is basically the C part of craft, wherever you got cleared to. Usually it's going to be the airport that your destination airport that you're planning on flying to. So that's always going to be your clearance limit, whatever is in that C part of craft. So let's go through these 2 paragraphs here in 91.185, and then I'll simplify them for you because I think this is the confusing part of the regulations. So going through part 3 here, it says when the clearance limit is a fix from which an approach begins, commence descent or descend and approach as close as possible to the expect further clearance time if one has been received, or if one has not been received, as close as possible to the estimated time of arrival is calculated from the filed or amended estimated time en route. So memorize it like that and recite it like that because that's probably how the DPEs are going to want to hear it. So pretty much to summarize all this nonsense, when your clearance limit is an initial approach fix, which chances are it's not. I've never gotten a clearance limit that's a VOR or anything other than an airport. So yeah, so it's probably not going to be fix where the approach begins. But if it is a fix where the approach begins, then you want to commence descent as close to your EFC time, which I have never gotten before, but you know, ATC could sometimes tell you expect the ILS 30 in 10 minutes, or expect direct to the initial approach fix in 10 minutes. If they do so, then in 10 minutes from when they say that, if you've lost comms, that's when you want to try to aim to start your descent for. If they haven't given you anything like that, once you hit that clearance limit, then instead of the EFC time, you'll want to use your ETA time, which is going to be on your filed route, probably on ForeFlight or wherever you filed it. You could see what time of arrival you were estimated to get to the airport, and then time it so that you can start shooting your approach exactly at that time from the initial approach fix inbound. Again, it's pilot's discretion since there's an emergency and whatnot. So personally, I would just start shooting the approach immediately. I wouldn't be circling at the clearance limit, you know, at the initial approach fix for no reason in IMC. So I feel like the safer decision, just kind of start that approach as soon as possible, and no reason to really be timing your EFC time perfect or your ETA time perfectly. Seems just like kind of like a waste of time. Then finally, the second part of this paragraph here says that if the clearance limit is not a fix from which an approach begins, leave the clearance limit at the EFC time if one has been received, or if none has been received upon arrival over the clearance limit, and proceed to a fix from which the approach begins, an initial approach fix, and commence descent or descend and approach as close as possible to the estimated time of arrival as calculated from the filed or amended estimated time en route. So this one's basically saying the exact same thing as the paragraph above. It's just applying it to if the clearance limit isn't an initial approach fix, which it's almost never going to be, so this is usually going to be the case, being the airport. So you would fly directly to the airport that you're cleared to. You would probably get to that point and then immediately start to depart to your initial approach fix, just direct to it. Time it as close to the EFC time if you got one. You probably won't. So if you don't have one of those, then try to time it as close to the ETA time on your filed route, just like we talked about before, for when you hit the initial approach fix. So that's pretty much all this one is saying. This second paragraph is usually going to be the situation that you get. And as for the Checkride, the DPEs like to give you these EFC times, so kind of be ready to apply those in a scenario where they might tell you, expect the ILS 30 in 10 minutes from now, and they'll want to hear you say that you'll go to the airport, you'll hover there, and then in 10 minutes, then you'll begin to start your descent over to the initial approach fix and all that. So just be ready for them to give you a scenario similar to that. But that's it for what you need to know for lost comms. So just memorize those 4 steps. Step number 1, if you exit IMC, maintain VFR at all times. Step number 2, A.V.E.F. So, you know, follow the routing of A.V.E.F, whatever order that comes in. And then step number 3, get to whatever of the highest altitudes is of your M.E.A assigned or your expected. And then finally, figure out if your clearance limit is a fix from which the initial approach begins. If it's not, then go to your clearance limit and then try to depart around the EFC or the ETA time to your initial approach fix, and then start your descent to your initial approach fix then, and then shoot the approach like normal according to the approach plate. Don't forget to be squawking 7600, and that's it for the video. Peace.